Welcome, and thank you for standing by. All participants are on a listen-only mode until we have a verbal Q&A period during today's conference. Today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Before I turn the call over to your main presenter, I just want to say with the Q&A, we do have a Q&A feature within WebEx. So on the bottom right, you can click on the Q&A button, and you should be able to ask questions throughout the presentation. Some will be answered within the Q&A feature. When we get to the verbal question part, you'll be prompted to raise your hand. The raise hand button is on the bottom of your screen. And also, they may choose to read some of the questions over the phone. If your question was not answered, the presenters and the subject matter experts will be supplied with the list of questions that we have. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the call over to your host, Christine Hartley. You may begin.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us to hear about updates to our methodology for the Vintage 2022 Estimates Series. My name is Christine Hartley, and I'm the Assistant Division Chief for Estimates and Projections in the Population Division at the U.S. Census Bureau. Today, I'll begin by sharing some background on the Population Estimates program and briefly reviewing our processes and methods at a high level. Then I'll describe the updates that were applied to these methods for the upcoming Vintage 2022 Estimate Series. As always, we hope that this information will be interesting to you and assist in planning for your own research and all the ways that you use our Census Bureau estimates. The Population Estimates Program is responsible for developing annual estimates products to satisfy a legal mandate to Congress as per Title 13, Section 181. These are the official estimates of population and housing units for the Census Bureau, and they're used in countless ways, such as to allocate federal funds, develop weights for demographic surveys, produce key statistical indicators, and facilitate planning at the state and local levels. Every year, we build a time series of estimates that starts at the date of the most recent decennial census and extends through the vintage year, which represents the latest year of estimates available. So vintage is the word that we use to designate that we're referring to a time series of estimates. The latest estimates that we've published are for July 1st, 2021, also known as Vintage 2021, although we have estimates on our website dating back to 1900, and of course, presently, we're preparing for the release of our new July 1st, 2022 estimates. Every year we release estimates for over 80,000 areas in the United States and Puerto Rico. You can see here that our geographic detail covers the nation, regions and divisions, states and Puerto Rico, metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas, counties and municipios, and finally, incorporated places and minor civil divisions, also referred to as cities and towns. The detail that we publish varies by level of geography, which is summarized here in this table. So we release estimates by demographic characteristics, which is age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin, down to the county level, and estimates of total population down to cities and towns. We also publish estimates of the group quarters population by age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin for the nation, total group quarters population for states and counties, and housing unit estimates for the nation's states and counties. For each series of estimates, our products are released on a rolling basis. Our release schedule for the Vintage 2022 estimates, which you see here and is available on our website, adheres to our typical annual release schedule with one exception that I will highlight in a moment. In December of each year, we publish population totals, components of change, and voting age population for the nation, states, and Puerto Rico. So these are the data that we'll be putting out later this month. In March, we published population totals for counties and municipios, and components of change for counties. Now, typically, this is when we would also release the metropolitan and micropolitan statistical area totals and components of change, since we build these from our county estimates. But this year is a little unique in that the state of Connecticut has transitioned from 8 counties to 9 county equivalent planning regions. And the guidance that's needed to aggregate these into metropolitan and micropolitan areas was not provided by the Office of Management and Budget, which is responsible for maintaining the delineations for core-based statistical areas. And because metros and micros can cross state lines, it's not just Connecticut that's impacted, which means that we cannot produce estimates for metros and micros until the updated guidance is made available next summer. However, in the meantime, we can produce estimates of total population for the old metros and micros by aggregating from our sub-county estimates, which is what we plan to do and which goes out in the month of May. But in advance of that, we have our national file by single year of age and sex, which goes out in April. Then in May, in addition to the metro and micro totals that I just mentioned, we'll also have population for cities and towns and housing unit totals for the nation's states and counties. Finally, in June, we published our estimates for the nation, states, and counties by age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin, and by age and sex for Puerto Rico and its municipios. For population estimates at the county level of geography and above, the POP Estimates program utilizes the cohort component method to measure population changes since the last census through the use of a variety of administrative records and survey data on births, deaths, and migration. Sources include the National Center for Health Statistics, Internal Revenue Service, Social Security Administration, Defense Manpower Data Center, and survey data from the American Community Survey and Puerto Rico Community Survey. We also work closely with state demographers and other population specialists through our partnership group, the Federal State Cooperative for Population Estimates, or FSCPE. Our estimates of housing units are also produced with a component-based method that starts with the most recent decennial census and uses a variety of survey and administrative data to estimate change in the housing stock, specifically in terms of building permits, estimates of non-permitted construction, mobile home shipments, and estimates of housing loss. Data sources include the Building Permit Survey, Survey of Construction, Manufactured Home Survey, American Community Survey, and Federal Emergency Management Agency individual records on requests for disaster assistance. We can also incorporate data provided by our partners in the FSCPE if they have alternative housing component data, such as local building permits, certificates of occupancy, housing conversions, and more. We use 2020 census housing unit counts for our housing unit base. So these counts are invariant, which means that in the context of the Census Bureau's disclosure avoidance system, they do not have differentially private noise infused into them. And finally, at the sub-county geography level, population estimates for cities and towns are created by distributing the county population estimates to each place within the county based on the place's ratio of household pop to total housing units. We add that to an estimate of the population in group quarters to get the total resident population. You saw on the previous slide how we derive our housing unit estimate. Meanwhile, our household and group quarters base populations are drawn from the results of the 2020 census with a small amount of differentially private noise infused into them to protect the confidentiality of respondents, as per the Census Bureau's disclosure avoidance guidelines. Our general methodological approach each year is to revise the entire series of estimates beginning at the date of the last census and up until the vintage year. So for example, the upcoming Vintage 2022 estimate series contains estimates for April 1st, 2020 and July 1st, 2020 through July 1st, 2022. And these estimates supersede the estimates that we published last year in the Vintage 2021 series for any overlapping dates. From vintage to vintage, there are 3 types of updates that we may incorporate into the time series. First, the base population is updated each year to reflect legal boundary changes or other geographic updates. It may also be updated due to changes resulting from count question resolution, or beginning next year for Vintage 2023, updates from the post-census group quarters review program. Then, as more recent or complete data become available, such as for births or deaths or the components that we use for our housing unit estimates, we use those to update the estimates of the components of change. We may also revise the methods of how we estimate the various components. What you'll see is that data updates are more likely to affect the estimates for more recent years in the time series, while method revisions generally affect the series cumulatively from the census date forward. Finally, we may improve our method of tying all of the components together and generating the estimates, and this type of change also affects the series from the census date forward. For vintage 2022, our updates to the estimates fall into the first two buckets. So let's start with our base population updates. A key detail regarding our methodology is that, as you've seen on previous slides, we measure change relative to our estimates base, which is typically the date of the latest decennial census. And traditionally, we would actually use the results of that census to serve as the estimates base, which is what we're doing for our housing units and our sub-county population estimates. However, for counties and higher levels of geography, this was not possible for our vintage 2021 estimates. The unique circumstances surrounding the 2020 census caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and updated disclosure avoidance requirements led to delays in the data availability, and this required the POP Estimates program to develop an innovative method to, for the first time, create an estimates base that was not exclusively drawn from the most recent decennial census. The solution that we came to, the blended base approach, combined three sources of data: the vintage 2020 estimates, which was the last series of estimates that we built off of the 2010 census, 2020 census total population for counties from the PL 94-171 redistricting file, and the National Demographic Analysis, or DA, estimates by age and sex, which are national level estimates for April 1st, 2020, developed using an alternative administrative records-based approach and used to estimate coverage in the decennial census. So for our last series of estimates, vintage 2021, the April 1st, 2020 estimates of total population for counties and higher levels of geography matched the published results of the 2020 census. Demographic detail in the estimates came from a combination of vintage 2021 estimate series and the 2020 demographic analysis estimates. This method proved effective for the vintage 2021 base population and even had some benefits, such as a somewhat mitigating effect on the persistent undercount of young children in census data. Additionally, as we've noted over the past year, the blended base framework is adaptive and it can be used and improved upon as long as it's needed, which is exactly what happened for vintage 2022. We were able to incorporate several improvements that I'll describe briefly, but which will be covered in more detail when the vintage 2022 methodology statement becomes available later this month during our first data release of the vintage. First, earlier I mentioned the transition in the state of Connecticut from 8 counties to 9 planning regions. So these new geographies have been incorporated into the estimate space for the vintage 2022 series. Then, whereas our vintage 2021 blended base used age and sex detail from 2020 demographic analysis estimates for ages 0 to 85 plus, for vintage 2022, we were able to expand this to use the full age range from DA up to ages 100 plus. We were also able to incorporate additional data from the 2020 census, specifically by population universe. As mentioned previously, in vintage 2021, we used the 2020 census PL 94-171 redistricting data for our county resident population totals. The resident population is the sum of the populations living in households and group quarters facilities. So for vintage 2022, we've taken the 2020 census household and group quarters population by the 7 major facility types from our sub-county estimates base and aggregated these data to the county levels. So not only does this improve the consistency across levels of geography, it enables us to capture geographic updates for the counties, which is something that we can do in our vintage 2021 estimates. As with the last vintage, demographic characteristics detail for the counties, that is age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin, are created using proportions from the vintage 2020 estimates. Finally, there were some processing improvements which enabled us to better approximate the size of the household and GQ population universes relative to the census results, as well as across our estimates geographies. Within the context of the changes to the base population, some questions that we hear frequently pertain to the timeline for incorporating additional data from the 2020 census into the estimate space, or what other improvements we have planned for the estimate space. This work is now part of a broader effort that's underway, led by the Census Bureau's Base Evaluation and Research Team, or BERT. This team was formed following the March 10th release of coverage measures from the Post-Enumeration Survey NDA, which provided valuable insight into the quality of the 2020 census results for specific groups. Whereas the results of the census cannot be changed for apportionment or redistricting, the blended base was identified as a possible mechanism for using information on coverage to build an estimates base that potentially improves some of the issues that have been observed. So the central mission of BERT is to determine the feasibility of taking coverage measures from the PES, DA, and other sources into account in the development of the population estimates. The team has been meeting regularly since March and consists of subject matter experts in the areas of POP estimates, age and sex statistics, coverage measurement, race and ethnicity, demography, and disclosure avoidance. Moving forward, BERT's research findings will inform decisions about what 2020 census data are used in the blended base and whether there are adjustments that can be made to the census data used in the base, which could be applied in equitable, methodologically sound, and demographically plausible ways. The team was too new for any findings to make their way into the upcoming Vintage 2022 estimates. So next December's Vintage 2023 estimates will be the first series to potentially incorporate findings from BERT. So that was an overview of the changes that we've applied to our Vintage 2022 base population. Now we'll take a look at some of the revisions to our components of change, beginning with updates to births and deaths. We had two primary improvements for Vintage 2022. First, we began processing race in the 31 categories provided by the National Center for Health Statistics, which are now consistent with the Office of Management and Budget's 1997 revisions to standards on measuring race and ethnicity. So essentially, although updated standards had been released by OMB in 1997, it took decades for all the states across the country, and thus NCHS, to fully transition to the updated guidance. And in the meantime, we had to rely on a race bridging process to redistribute the 1977 OMB 4-category race groups to the 31 races that are used in national estimates processing. So the purpose of this first goal was to eliminate the race bridging, allowing us to produce more accurate births and deaths by characteristics, since now we're using the real data in place of the bridging factors that were created in the early 2000s. Second, we incorporated more recent data from NCHS, which was not available to us prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So essentially, our processes were just not set up to accommodate such recent data, and we had to make adjustments to be able to take advantage of them and thus improve our estimates by capturing natality and mortality patterns like seasonality and COVID-19 impacts in the most recent years. And as with the base population, more detail on these updates will be provided in the upcoming Vintage 2022 methodology statement later this month, including how these improvements were specifically applied nationally and subnationally. We also updated our net international migration component in several ways. First, using our previous methodology, emigration of the non-US born, which is a subcomponent that feeds into our estimate of net international migration, was trending too high due to changes in the American Community Survey, which is our data source for this subcomponent. In particular, increasing non-response, especially since 2016, and changes back in 2015 to the wording of the year of entry survey question that we use contributed to this trend. So for Vintage 2022, we have applied a constant rate, which is informed by data from an earlier part of the decade, 2010 to 2016. Second, beginning with Vintage 2022, we're now including in our NIM estimates the population born abroad of American parents, which is a rapidly growing category within the native born subcomponent of net international migration. And finally, due to the lag between when the American Community Survey data are collected and then when they become available for use, the 2021 ACS data did not reflect post-COVID recovery in the levels of immigration. So we use trends found in more recent administrative data to adjust ACS estimates, which is not typical of our method, but is consistent with what we did in Vintage 2021. And the aggregate result of these three changes is a higher estimate of net international migration, as you'll see later this month. So that is all the information that we have for today on updates to our Vintage 2022 methodology. And we are about to open it up in case anybody wants to put additional questions in the chat or wants to vocalize their questions. But if you need more information at any time, you can reach out to the Coordination, Dissemination, and Outreach branch, which is located in the Estimates and Projections area of the Population Division. And the contact information for that branch is available on this slide, along with the link to the Population and Housing Unit Estimates website on census.gov. This is actually the site that you would go to get the estimates data, since our current estimates are not yet available on the data.census.gov platform and are not expected to be incorporated there anytime in the immediate future. So thank you very much, everyone. We are happy to take any questions that you may have, and I have several members of my team here to assist as needed. I think you can raise your hand if you have one, and then I'll see that your hand is raised and I can acknowledge you so you can get unmuted. We'll see how this goes.
Christine, do you see the names that have popped up on the right on
I
the
do
attendees?
not see
Okay.
them.
You might have to hit that arrow next to the attendees on the left to expand it.
Yes, I've got
them.
it.
There you
All
go.
right, great. Okay, so I see the first question is from Elena. Looks like you are unmuted.
What you guys mean by alternative data? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so you said reference to alternative data 2 slides ago. Okay, so I think you're referring to when I was speaking about the base evaluation and research team, which is evaluating the feasibility of incorporating results from the post-enumeration survey, demographic analysis, and alternative data sources. So essentially, the team's research, at this point is very broad, and we are investigating whether it's possible to use coverage measures from the Census Bureau to incorporate them somehow into the estimate space. But we're also open to, the possibility of other types of data sources. It's not really specifically defined, but which, might be able to, make adjustments for other types of coverage errors or issues. It's just, I guess at this point, we're not limited to just the post-enumeration survey and demographic analysis. So that's what the reference to alternative data sources meant. Hopefully that answers your question, but let me know if you have a follow-up. In the meantime, I see the next question is from Jeff Newman.
You're going to be releasing your estimates based on the new definitions that came out. BEA for our county per capita personal income estimates, and we're going to be tied still for
Jeff,
a while.
just one moment, Jeff. Because what happens, there's a WebEx technical issue where we missed the first part of your question. So for the following questions, when you're unmuted and you think you could speak, just wait a few seconds before you ask your questions. Maybe say hello first, and then we can say, okay, go ahead with your question. So you don't have to repeat yourself. But Jeff, if you could please start from the beginning, we would appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, Christine.
Hi.
Hi. I guess my question about Connecticut is, it sounds like you're going to be releasing county estimates based on the new definitions.
That's correct.
Will you have a crosswalk to show how the new definitions match back to the existing county definitions? And the reason is because our personal income statistics that we publish are still going to be published using the previous definitions, because a lot of the source data isn't in yet. So I was just trying to figure out if there's a way I can crosswalk that back to the counties.
It's possible to use the minor civil divisions the minor civil divisions align with both the old counties and the new planning regions. I believe our geography division, I don't know if it's on their website, but there is some kind of crosswalk out there.
Okay.
But if you reach out to us, we can see what we can point you to. I don't think there's anything available specifically from the estimates program that like links the old counties to the new counties, because they don't divide up evenly. But yeah, we'll see what we can point you to.
Okay. And then I have one other question, which doesn't relate to the vintage 22, but it's, do you have plans sometime next year to also release intercensal numbers that are consistent with both the 2010 and 2020 censuses?
Yes.
Or is it, okay.
So we are working on our 2010 to 2020 intercensal estimate series. Typically, they would have been released by now. This is one of the products that has been impacted by the delays in the release to the 2020 census results, which will serve as the endpoint for the intercensal series. So we're kind of waiting on some developments with the 2020 census data products, and then we'll be able to get our intercensals out. That's a good question.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next question is from Andrew Forster.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi there. Andrew Forrester, BLS. Quick question about the updates to the group quarters estimates. Given the data improvements, will you be releasing any demographic detail, such as age, sex, race, ethnicity, for the group quarters, or will it just be a standard sort of total by geography? Thanks.
Thanks for your question. So our group quarters products will just, at this point, be the same that they typically are. So at the national level, we release group quarters totals by age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin. But below the national level, it is just the total group quarters population. If you have like a special need at BLS for maybe more detail than that, we do have a special tabulations program where we might be able to provide that to you based on the use case. So that would be another reason you could reach out to that coordination, dissemination, and outreach branch email address that I shared before. So actually, I'll go back to that slide. So, just let us know if you want to pursue something like that. There we go.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, next question is from Ken Johnson.
Ken, you should be able to unmute now.
Hello, this is Ken Johnson at the University of New Hampshire.
Hi.
So I have two questions for you. One, you talked about how you're going to use improved birth and death data from CDC. I assume the provisional data that they're releasing. Could you give some more detail about how you're going to incorporate them, and specifically Are you incorporating them only at the national level, at the state level, at the county level? At what levels will they be incorporated into your modeling?
Sure. Actually, I have the sponsor of our vital statistics team here, Sandy Johnson. So maybe she could offer a little more insight into how those data are being incorporated. Give her a second to get unmuted.
Hi. So in response to your question, this year we've incorporated the provisional estimates, as you mentioned, from the NCHS website, and these are at the state level of geography. There is suppression concerns at county levels of geography, so we decided not to use those. Last year we had only incorporated national level data, but this year we wanted to go a little bit more detailed to get a better representation of what was actually happening at the state level.
Good. I'm happy to hear that. I was actually disappointed in the estimates last year because of the birth and death data. I have one other question. I assume that the 2021 census estimates will be adjusted, or as they usually are, when you bring out a new year of data, you'll also go back and revise the previous year. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we'll apply these updates to the estimate space that I described, and then we'll, roll changes forward through the 2021 estimate into the 2022 estimate.
And that would apply for this birth data as well. That is, you'll go back and use the provisional data that that CDC has available for 2020 to 2021 as well.
Yes, that's a regular practice where every year we go back and basically get whatever the most updated birth and death data are, that are available at the time of production, and we pull them in. So we will be doing that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for your question. Okay, so let's see if I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to go to the chat and see if there are questions that I can answer. Okay, I see one. One successful CQR submission moved 3 dorms from one county to a neighboring county. Will Vintage 2022 estimates change the 2 affected counties' age distributions? So we do incorporate updates from count question resolution, but I won't know if this specific one you're referring to will be incorporated because they have to be received by a certain time in the year when the base population data gets sent over to our program. So if they weren't incorporated this year, then that's the kind of change that would show up next year. Let me know if you have a follow-up question there. Scrolling down. So question, I'm curious to know more about the details and components for the blended data sources. Is it possible to understand the impact for our region with respect to specific population and data types? For example, how did we do specifically on the undercount of young children, or how reliable is our building permit survey? Okay, so in terms of the, I guess, kind of impact of the blended base, one challenge that we have is that, at this time, we don't have the census data published, to serve as a benchmark. So for example, what does it look like in terms of the undercount of young children? Well, until we have the results of the census data by single year of age at those levels of geography, we can't really make those comparisons. In terms of regional impacts for specific population and data types, depending on which groups you're looking at, it might be a similar situation. One limitation right now of the blended base is that in terms of making comparisons to the census, we don't have modified race data available to us yet. One, I guess, significant difference between census results and population estimates data is that we have different race categories. The census includes some other race population, and in our estimates, we redistribute that group because we need it to align with the administrative data inputs that we get, which don't include that category. So that's another product that's been delayed by the other delays to the 2020 census data products processing. But as soon as we have that available to us so that we can kind of align our race groups and the census race groups, then we'll be able to make more informative comparisons. And that might include some of the things that you're talking about. I'm actually not so sure about how reliable is your building permit survey. That might be the kind of thing where you would either, you could potentially reach out to BPS, or maybe your state representative from the FSCPE might have more insight into the quality of those data. But feel free to send us an email and we can help get some more specifics if you need this information for something. Okay, scrolling down. Can we send the link of the recording to the webinar through email? So the Census Academy website will be updated and it'll have the recording on that website. So if you go to census.gov and you, I think in the search bar, type Census Academy, it'll bring you to the page where you will be able to access the recording. It won't be there immediately. It might take a week, or I don't know actually how long it takes, but it'll be there soon. Okay, rolling down. What day in December will the total population numbers be released for the nation and states? We are aiming for December 22nd, but there are a lot of different things that could happen between now and then in terms of our production schedule. So that's why we say it's tentatively scheduled for the 22nd. So it is possible, and if it gets delayed, we'll send out an announcement, but at this point, that's what we're shooting for. Will you ever post population estimates by individual age and years? I think now it's by age group. So at the national level, we do publish in our estimates products single year of age data. It's actually single year of age by sex, race, and Hispanic origin. That's at the state level as well. At the county level right now, it's an age group. That's due in part to reliability of the data. When you get down to that level of detail, sometimes the data can be kind of thin when you cross them by that many categories. We do have, through our special tabulation program, if you have a research project or something you're working on where you require greater detail than that, there is a file that you can request through our by request only program. So that's something you could reach out to this email address for if you wanted to access those data. I would say that it's possible that one day we would put them out by single year of age. That's on our kind of like our research docket. But it's not something that's, currently in the works. Scrolling down. Could you elaborate a bit more on how incorporating more Census 2020 data by universe will be able to capture geography updates for the counties, such as the changes in Connecticut? Yes, so last year for Vintage 2021, we just kind of retained the county geographic boundaries from our Vintage 2020 estimates. But as I mentioned, for our sub-county population estimates, we use 2020 census data where we add a little bit of differentially private noise separately to the household and group quarters population. So every year we take that census file and we apply updated geographic boundaries to it, for April 1st, 2020, so that when we put out our new July 1st, 2022 estimates, they'll be current geographic boundaries as of January 1st, 2022. So since we have that happening at the sub-county level, where we have the updated geographies every year using census data and adding the differentially private noise, we can aggregate that to the county level by those two universes, household and group quarters, and then use that in our estimates processing for counties. Hopefully that was a sufficient enough response. I don't know if anyone that's on the call with me, if I overlooked anything, they want to jump in. I'll pause for a second here. Getting reassurances that that was fine. Okay, good. All right, so moving on. Does release to the Census API follow the same schedule as the release to data.census.gov? technically, it does. Unfortunately, right now, the Census API cannot accommodate our files. So the only way to access the estimates data will be through the website. So we'll have Excel tables and comma separated value files that you can download with all the data, but they will not, unfortunately, be in the API. We are working with the Center for Enterprise Dissemination Services to get the data into the platform. So hopefully we come to some kind of solution for that, in the near future. Please mention again who we might query about a potential Connecticut crosswalk. I guess I probably didn't give a specific response for that. I said geography division. So I don't know where that would be on the website. So we'll look into it. And if you, if that's something that you might need, if it exists and we can get it to you, you can email us at this address here, pop.cdob@census.gov, and we can follow up on that. Scrolling down, a lot of questions. Should we avoid comparing blended based population estimates with non-blended based population estimates if we want a longitudinal look over time? So the answer to that is yes at this point, until we have our intercensal estimates completed, just because if you are comparing estimates that we created, that incorporate the results of the census with the ones that were before the census, there's going to be something called the error of closure, where, we built, say, the vintage 2020 estimates from the 2010 census, and, they came in a little lower than the census. So then between, the end of that time series, 2019, and our new updated 2020 base pop, there'll be the gap that the intercensals product will then go back and redistribute over the decade to make a nice, smooth, consistent time series between 2010 and 2020. So as soon as that product is available, you'll be able to conduct those longitudinal analyses. But in the meantime, it won't be as informative if you try to compare post and pre 2020 estimate series. Okay, moving on. All right, state total population was invariant. County total population was not. Will future vintages use DHC, age, sex data, or redistricting population totals as controls? So at this point, we don't actually know. The base evaluation research team is looking into what 2020 census data we could possibly incorporate. It could be DHC data. It could be internal unprotected data that we then add noise to. It could be both. So yeah, at this point, it's too soon for us to say, but it's a possibility. We just have to evaluate the data for our particular needs, and then decide. Will the recording be available before the estimates are released? I think it should be. I don't know, Anthony, do you have a sense of how long recordings usually take to pop up to the website?
It should be within 2 weeks.
Okay, yes, then what's today? The 5th. Seems very likely that it will be available just prior to the release, most likely. Will there be a document released regarding the technical details of the processing improvements that you mentioned for vintage 2022? We'll have our methodology statement. I guess I'm not sure whether someone would consider that technical or not. It might depend on you. If there were technical details that you felt weren't available in that document and you had questions, that would be an instance where you could reach out to us at this address, and we could give you more insight into the questions, because it's definitely more detailed than I shared today, but it's not, down in the weeds if you were trying to, recreate the estimates and program them yourselves or something like that, but kind of a balance. So, please reach out to us if you do have questions about the methodology. Okay. So I think the next question might be about the contents of the March release. The March release this year will be county population totals and components of change, total population for Puerto Rico municipios, and then the metro and micro totals, which would usually go out in March, will be out in May based on the old CBSA metro micro definitions, which will aggregate from our minor civil divisions. I'm interested in any documentation or methodology regarding how you previously recategorized race from the other race category. Okay, we have a website on our population and housing unit estimates website that highlights the modified race research. So I don't know if somebody from my staff can throw that, and maybe you already have, and I just didn't see it, throw the link to the modified race page into the chat tool, and then you'd be able to access it there. There should be some method statements on how that was done. There are different files that kind of show the variable, you know, in the one coding versus the other coding. Again, it's not available yet based on the 2020 census, but you can see the research from 2010 and I believe 2000 on the website. Okay. I think expected publication date of the intercensal revision. If things stay on track, I mean, I don't know. This is one of the products that keeps getting bumped back further and further due to situations that are beyond our control. I would say we would love if it was out, you know, in late spring, early summer. So that's what we're working toward. But again, that'll depend on availability of input data. So as soon as we have an official release date, you know, we're actually with all the data we need and we're working toward a release, we'll start to publicize that to everyone because I know there are a lot of people who are waiting on that product. So that's everything I see so far. We'll wait another couple minutes in case anybody has another question or if you want to raise your hand.
Hey, Christine, I just wanted to let you and folks know that in the chat, thanks to Lindsay Spell of our staff, I linked the URL for the Connecticut Crosswalk so folks can take a look at it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And special thank you to Lindsay for getting that link to us. So again, that's for anyone who is looking for the crosswalk for the Connecticut geography change. That link is now in the chat tool, along with the link to the modified race data research page. All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Again, you know, we definitely encourage you to reach out to pop.cdob@census.gov if you have questions. We're happy to provide more detail. Otherwise, you can look for our new vintage 2022 estimates later this month. So I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. Have a nice day. You may disconnect at this time.